Good evening. On behalf of KPCC and Southern California Public Radio, welcome to the Crawford Family Forum. In tonight's program, we take up the pros and cons of using technology in the classroom. Before we begin, KPCC would like to thank LA Universal Preschool for their support of our education programming. And now, we turn to the stage with our host and moderator, KPCC's education editor, Evelyn LaRubia.
Welcome. Thanks for coming out on a school night. It's cold, you could be home watching holiday specials, and yet you're here talking about education, and that's great. So thanks, to all of you for coming. The reason you're here is we're in a sort of a momentous time in education. There's a lot of changes going on. And maybe one of the biggest modern changes that we're experiencing right now is this push towards technology. Technology in the classroom isn't new. We've had blackboards, we've had pencils, we've had smartboards, and document cameras. But we're at a moment right now where there's a particular push to a particular kind of technology, and that is for each child in a classroom to have their own device. And it has become a little controversial in LA. So we're glad you're here to talk about it, to get down to the issues of whether this is a good thing or a bad thing, how kids can benefit from it, and what issues there might be. And so we welcome our guests who are here to talk to us about it, who know a lot more about it than I do. Bernadette Lucas is the director of LA Unified School District's Common Core Technology Program. And for 6 years, she was the principal of Melrose Elementary, which was a math, science, and technology magnet that used one-to-one devices for a long time. And to her left is Patricia Birch, and she is the associate professor of education at USC's Rogers School of Education. And she studies quality and access in public education. She's got a book coming out in March, and it's called Equal Scrutiny, Privatization, and Accountability in Digital Education. And next to her is Nancy Cheever, and she is an associate professor of communications at CSU Dominguez Hills. She's the co-author of a number of books, including one called Rewired and one called I Disorder. And her research focuses on the intersection between psychology and media, or new technologies. Please give them a hand. Okay, so one-to-one devices. Bernadette, what is the best argument to do this? What are you hoping to achieve by giving each kid their own personal device that they can't do with a piece of paper or a hunk of clay?
Sure. What we're hoping to accomplish with the one-to-one integration is around engagement, equity, access, collaboration, creativity. One might ask, can't those things be done without the technology? Right. Yes. Can they be done better with a one-to-one program? I think yes.
Why do you think so? What's the evidence behind that?
There's a whole body of research behind it, but you sure can find research that counters it. So I'm going to speak about my experience. Okay. So I'm watching my students, kindergarten through 5th grade. My kindergarten through first graders were in a 2-to-1 program. My second graders through 5th graders were in a 1-to-1 program. And I saw firsthand what a one-to-one device can do when integrated well. It's not the fact that the children have a device. It's how does the teacher use the device purposefully and with meaning to access the curriculum for the boys and girls.
And so one of the big reasons that the district is pushing for this is you say that it's particularly important for low-income kids. So did you find that it was better for certain kinds of kids?
Well, when I think about my experience as a principal, I wouldn't say that it was better for kids who were from circumstances at low income. Yeah. It was more about they didn't have necessarily the access that my kids who are a little more affluent did. So I had kids ranging from, Title I to their parents were making $10,000 contributions to the school. Yeah. So in my opinion, it's about how the teacher integrates the technology, whether the child is a Title I identified student or not.
And so tell me when it works. What does it look like?
It looks like a laboratory where there's a lot of synergy and almost what we would call magic, but there's a science to that magic. So we see students working in groups collaboratively with purpose. The teachers have identified and charged the kids with a task based on their standards, and the kids are using the technology as a tool to access that task creatively and collaboratively.
Okay. So I want to bring Dr. Lucas into the conversation. You've done a lot of research on this particular subject, right? This idea of how one-to-one technologies and bringing technology in the classroom works, and you've seen it in a lot of different places. What have you seen? What is the evidence that you've seen for or against the technology?
Well, Bernadette actually really nailed a lot of the key points. I think that digital education has an enormous amount of promise, and it has promise for, as Bernadette mentioned, issues of access and quality, all of the things that we're hearing about in policy. But, and the but is, the but is two things. One is when we've been talking about personalized instruction for a long time, separate from digital education, right? So that in itself is a very good thing. We want that. We want instruction that's responsive to students whose native language isn't English. We want instruction that's responsive to students with special needs. So now we have digital education being paired with, or technology being paired with personalized instruction. Great. There's a lot of promise there.
And by personalized instruction, you mean kids can go at their own pace. They're not necessarily following a very rigid curriculum in the classroom.
That's one way to answer it. I use that term because it's being used a lot in the press when we talk about digital education and its goals. So I think that but the but is that, and Bernadette mentioned a number of these, there's a lot of conditions that need to be met. One is the issue of instruction. Is this a replacement for the teacher? That's not good. Second, curriculum. Is it digitized curriculum, the same old sort of textbook, or is it live, the kind of exciting things that Bernadette's talked about? And last, technology generates a lot of data, a lot of information, right? It's part of it. So we need to think about the quality of that data. Is it reliable? Is it valid?
But so far, have you found that these one-to-one programs, are they improving test scores for kids? Are they making kids learn faster or better?
Well, I would say that Bernadette is correct. There is quite a bit of research out there, and the research is quite mixed. But the research that's been done was done before the web boom. So it's somewhat dated. In fact, we did a review of those studies, and it's very, very dated. And so we need, we have little evidence as of yet to show that it works. What does it mean that it works? Nothing works for all kids, but we're just on the tip of the iceberg in terms of that research.
Yeah, and so when you talk about personalized education, and from my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that a lot of these one-to-one programs are sort of based on this idea of one-to-one tutoring, where kids have someone who they can talk to, a tutor or a teacher that helps them through it. And so the idea, I suppose, is that these devices can replicate that. And is that realistic?
I think we do and have seen that happen. Part of what I've studied is digital tutoring, after-school tutoring, where a student gets tutoring online.
Right.
And so the rosy picture is that it's great for students who can't necessarily stay after school to get tutoring because they need to take care of their younger siblings to get that, to be able to access that online. The other end of that continuum, which we have seen in a tutor provider that's serving over, in another study, 14,000 students per se, is that the student spends, the tutor and the student spend 15 or 20 minutes just trying to get the technology to work. That's the downside.
That's the downside.
It's not just about that, but that's real. One would think that that's a sort of what we all would imagine as worst case scenario, but it's real.
So technology, right? So that brings us to Dr. Cheevers, and you look a lot at this idea of what happens to kids when they spend a lot of time with technology. And so as I was preparing for this, I was reading a study about 8 to 18-year-olds and their consumption of media, 10.5 hours a day on electronic media. That's up 3 hours from a decade ago. Should parents want their kids to, on top of that device time, have more device time at school? Is that something you're worried about?
Yes. It is something that should be of a concern to both parents and teachers. And we really need to look at, like you said, the amount of time that kids are using media, because it's really important to understand the consequences of overuse.
What are some of those consequences?
Well, of course, it depends on the age of the child. Very young children should not be exposed to too much technology, because technology does something to our brains, especially when, you know, it involves flashy visuals and lots of auditory, you know, multisensory sort of experiences. It releases dopamine in our brains, and that dopamine makes us feel good, right? So kids are gonna naturally want to interact and interact and continue interacting with these devices, and they do quite frequently. So again, for younger children, it's probably best to try to limit it. But
what about school-age kids?
Yeah, so for older children, we kind of have a guideline of 5 minutes of FaceTime to 1 minute of screen time for younger kids. Okay. And then that ratio changes as they get older. So, you know, children or teenagers in high school, you can go up to 5 minutes of screen time and then 1 minute of face-to-face. There's something called the basic rest and activity cycle that is really important in children's brains as well, and it's important for all of us, where we really need to take breaks from technology. Generally
because of
after
cognitive overload?
Right. Yeah. There's something called a cognitive load, and you know, multisensory and you know, some tasks take a lot of cognitive load and can really complicate our brains, and we need to rest our brains to be healthy.
Yeah. When you talk about changes in the brain, so there have been a number of studies of teachers who will swear that technology is making their kids more impatient, shorter attention span. They want the first, you know, answer on Google. You know, they really can't focus in the way that they used to be able to focus. Is that because of the technology? Teachers seem to think so, or are they right about that?
Well, it appears to be that way, but all we can do is really look at the way that children and teens interact with the devices. We can't say that is the absolute cause of their distraction, but we all witness it. You know, we see it every day that kids tend to be highly distracted by these devices. Right. I think 60 to 70% of young people check their devices every 15 minutes.
Wow.
And they think about their devices constantly. And if they can't check their devices, they become anxious.
Right.
So that is a problem. They have them by their bedside at night. They check them right before they go to sleep and the first thing when they wake up in the morning. And yes, I think in the classroom it is a problem because they're constantly thinking about their communication, maybe on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and they're not focusing on the task.
I'm sure it depends on the age too. Yeah.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah. So, Ms. Lucas, what did you find? You know, I mean, so you did this for several years at a school that did the one-to-one. Did you find the lack of attention in the classroom?
You know, I have to say I did not. Now, I will say this. I think it's important to look at things from multiple perspectives. There are going to be kids who their attention spans manifest as being shorter, and those who don't. But overall, I found that when the classroom is well organized, with the technology in mind, there are procedures and protocols in place. The kids know when the devices are going to be used and why. Yeah. That I just did not see that manifest in the classroom from my kindergartners through my fifth graders, but we were also very purposeful about how we use the technology and when.
They didn't have it out all the time, right?
They absolutely did not.
How often did they use it?
It definitely depended on the academic task, but I would say even my oldest kids, my fifth graders, 10 and 11-year-olds, perhaps an hour to an hour and a half at the max. That's if we had a tech-embedded task going on. Okay. And I just want to emphasize the purpose behind it. Right. The purpose.
Right. Mm-hmm. And so what are some of those tasks that you would say, okay, we're gonna bring out the devices for this?
Sure. So for example, at the time my kids were still under the California standards. I say that as we move into the Common Core standards. Yeah. So as they were learning and mastering those standards, say in math, the kids were learning, I just gave this example today, they were learning area and perimeter. Okay. So my fifth grade teachers would craft a task around, you know, program your robot to XYZ based on the standards we're learning. So the task was very explicit. So to program that robot, the kids would have to use their laptop to do it. So there was a definite purpose. There was an amount of time they had to do this and execute the task.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So that that sounds like the kind of stuff that you're talking about, Dr. Lucas, right? I mean, so I'm sorry.
I'm Dr. Birch.
Dr. Birch.
Yeah. Tricia.
Forgive me. You know, the sort of very specific tasks where you know what you're going to get out of it when you use the technology.
Well, you know, good instruction is good instruction. The technology, as Bernadette has noted, should just simply be a medium for leveraging good instruction and higher order thinking.
Right.
As you noted earlier, the reason for that is because it's not having technology in schools. We like to think of it as, you know, this brand new thing, but it's not brand new.
We've been buying computers for 10 to 15 years.
We've been buying computers. Apple, you know, in the 1970s, Apple was making, you know, made a computer that was affordable to schools so that principals could just write a check. So it's been around for a very long time. Television, phones. Now we have whiteboards. What matters again is the integration. And I would add to Bernadette's point, it's the integration to the curriculum, but it's also investment in teacher training, teacher capacity, so that these, you know, the burden of this isn't borne by teachers.
So, right, teachers are the linchpin, right, for everything that goes on in the classroom.
Absolutely.
Without questions, probably a lot of them in the room right now. How many teachers in the room? I'm just curious. Would raise your hands. Wow. Okay, so it's about a third. So, you know, are teachers prepared? Is the cart coming before the horse, as some people have suggested? You know, are teachers actually, in the different programs we've seen, using so many, are they prepared for this kind of integration, or is it, you know, perhaps moving a little too fast?
Well, reforms, not to dodge your question, if you want me to respond, reforms always come down too fast. And so, but we have to think about, I mean, I think we would, in the ideal world, we wouldn't launch something while we're piloting it. We would pilot it first, and have time to do that and do that well. And that would be not just, you know, to sort of save ourselves some time, but to create an environment where we know it's going to stick.
Yeah.
So I think, yes, it's coming down quite fast. We can't stop the train, but we can certainly make some informed decisions so that it's done well.
Were you concerned about the recent survey that came out from UTLA that said that, you know, while teachers by and large said that they thought they were, you know, that they could use the technology and they thought it would motivate kids, that ultimately they weren't all that impressed by it. You know, they didn't really think it was all, you know, all that it was cut out to be. Does that concern you as someone who is in charge of leading this program in a district?
Which survey was it?
It was the Common Core Technology Survey, I do believe it was
About
called.
a month ago?
It just came out this week.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, I mean, whenever I hear about a survey, I want to hear how was the survey administered?
Right.
Who responded?
Right.
Because oftentimes those who aren't, you know, thrilled with an initiative respond. Those who are happy don't. So I can only speak to my experience. So with my teachers. Yeah. I mean, what's tricky about talking about something like technology in these terms is a lot of focus on like the technology.
The device itself.
Yes, the device itself. Yeah. And so that doesn't concern me. I think whenever we're talking about a cultural shift, if teachers have not, as you said, and as my colleagues have said, teachers will lead this effort. Yeah. At my school site, I get a lot of credit for what happened at my school. I know I was the principal there, and I know what that means. Yeah. But what happened at my school would not have happened without my teachers. They are and were extraordinary. Yeah. And so it was essential, and they constantly gave me feedback around professional development. So their excitement was linked to what was their PD, was I ensuring that the PD and their access was aligned to their individual and group professional development needs. Yeah. So no, that does not concern me, because I'm also hearing from the field from, you know, many other teachers that this is the way we have to go. There's going to be a mixed bag in a district our size, so I have to focus on the needs of our students. So
what happens if a teacher says, I don't need this? You know, I've been teaching for 20 years. You know, I have the way I do it. It works. I'm a high-performing teacher, and I just don't want to use it. Is that an option?
I think that's a very valid point that they're making. I think the question comes back to, you may not need it, but do your students need it? And not just for today. I used to often say to the parents of my students at my school, I don't just think of your children, how they are today at 5 years old and 9 years old. I think of how they'll be in college and beyond. So it's easy for us to say now we don't need this. We know for a fact that the kids are going to need access not to the technology so much, but to the skill set that the technology accesses for them. So that's my conversation with teachers who say that.
Right. And what happens if they say no? I mean, can someone actually be fired for not wanting to use an iPad in their classroom?
Wow, you're really putting me in a corner
Just
right
putting
there.
you on the spot.
I think the answer to that has to be no, they just won't be fired. I mean, now, if the content is on the device and a teacher or any educator is not using the district-adopted curriculum, that's a different story.
Sure.
But my approach with educators is not, if you're not doing this, we're going to be out to get you. That you can't approach it that way because there's a learning curve and shift for adults as well.
Yeah.
Many of our students could teach their teachers how to use certain applications.
Right.
So how do we support teachers in the comfort with the transition to that? That's okay.
Yeah.
That happened at my school every day. My 5-year-olds were teaching me how to use certain things.
Sure.
And you can't be intimidated by that.
Yeah.
So I see it more as a cultural shift and honoring that which teachers bring to the table.
Right. Speaking of kids teaching you how to do it, Dr. Chevers, did you tell me about the study in Africa where the kids were given, talk to us about that.
Yeah, unfortunately, I can't remember which country it was, but there was a pilot study where it was a very poor country. Kids had never been exposed to technology before, and they were all given iPads. And they all intuitively knew how to turn them on, how to interact with them, the different hand gestures that you need to do on the device. So it was quite remarkable how easy it was for them to interact with the devices. Mm-hmm.
But that's not to say that they don't need media training, right? And that is something that you see that is lacking in most curriculum.
Right. For me, I think in my research, something that I'm very interested in looking at is how teachers can teach media literacy. And I know it's part of the Common Core standards. Yeah. I have reviewed them, and I think that's wonderful. But unfortunately, right now, we're really not spending as much time as we need to on media literacy, teaching children how to discern between facts and fiction, the variation of credibility of information that's found on the internet. Most children believe, especially the younger ones, that all information on the internet is equal and trustworthy.
Well, that's right.
And that's a problem. And we found in our research that when faced with a task of locating information on the internet, they will type in a keyword or a couple keywords, and then the information that they use is generally the first page that appears, or the first five
the very
or so
first
links.
entry off of Google.
Right,
yeah.
because they don't take the time in general to find the best information. So yeah, I think it's really important for both teachers and parents to teach that to children.
Yeah. Dr. Birch, you mentioned earlier that one of the issues is that this kind of one-to-one changes the role of the teacher in the classroom. What do you mean by that? Can you explain that?
I mean, it can change the role of the teacher.
Mm-hmm.
Just by definition, if you have curriculum that's loaded onto an interactive, web-based system, it's going to change the role of the teacher. It's different teaching with that than with a textbook, right? But so there's that. I think the more important thing to focus on, though, Evelyn, is that so teachers are key, and they're the linchpin. And there's a lot that we still don't know and we need to know for teachers to understand what they're going to be doing and up against. How are teachers evaluated when they are in an online or blended setting? Something that we need to think about. What if teachers don't have easy access to the data that they're expected to use to make performance evaluations?
The assessments, the automatic assessments on the iPads, yeah.
I'm sort of dodging your question, but my point is simply that the role of the teacher ultimately will change as everything is being changed by the web. The question, the issue becomes what aspects of that are teachers pushing and what aspects are being pushed down upon them.
So as I understand it, one of the ways it changes is if kids are going on their own speed on these devices, and the teacher becomes more of a coach, sort of walking around answering questions as they progress through the curriculum.
Right, and I think Bernadette can speak to this, and also Nancy. But so that's in the ideal world, right? And that's where we're headed. I think. That's where we want to go with this technology. In the real world. Also, you have a situation where students don't actually know how to use the technology. It's one thing to know how to use an iPad. It's something quite different to know how to learn using an iPad. There have been. I'm very much excited by the promise of this stuff. Unfortunately, I also have seen some instances where it creates more work for teachers than not, and that's not where we want to go.
Work in terms of setting the programs up, or work in terms of?
Work in terms of when the technology goes down, work in terms of figuring out how you actually use this curriculum.
Right.
And that's not teachers not necessarily against more work. But given that they're the linchpin here, that I would say they need to be involved in the dialogue, essentially.
Right. Dr. Cheeverson, so what does that change, right? So now you're looking at your iPad and you're not looking at the teacher. What does that change psychologically in the class? How does that affect maybe other skills that kids are maybe not picking up while they're doing that?
Right. So there's a real issue with multitasking, or actually there's no such thing as multitasking. We call it task switching now.
Right.
And the problem with multitasking, or trying to listen to a teacher talk and interact with a device, is that neither of those tasks are going to be performed the best that they could be performed if they were just focusing on one thing. So what we find is if people are interrupted or try to switch from listening to instruction and doing things like text messaging or interacting with a device, they tend to do significantly poorer on exams. We actually did a study like this where we text messaged students in the classroom while they were listening to a videotaped lecture, and they were given varying text messages. Some they had to respond to, some they were just given the text message. And
they didn't ignore them, did they?
No. They were told if they did get a text message that they could look at it.
Okay.
So between the people who received no text messages and those who received the highest number, those people who received the highest number did significantly poorer on the test of the material.
Because they weren't paying attention. Yeah.
And that's obvious, right?
Yeah.
But there have been several studies like that where, if you interrupt a task and have them switch their focus to something else, and the focus is taken off even for a few minutes, they are not able to understand what was being said. There's a really famous study by Colin Cherry from the 1950s where it's called a dichotic listening task, and they had people listening to two conversations in either ear, and then they were asked to repeat back what one of them said, and they couldn't do it. Yeah, you're probably familiar with that.
I just wanted to add to your interesting comments. I think our discussion about the iPads and getting into the sort of the nature of the gadgets. Remember, of course, that we know that there are disparities in terms of economic disparities in terms of whether low-income kids have access to phones, to the apps that are free. So those are the kinds of things, right, that are important, because we want the potential of digital education is also that it allows kids to learn outside of school, Evelyn, right?
Right.
And that's good. We know that kids learn and spend a lot of time outside of school. So I think that as we think about this, we need to think about the potential of learning in informal contexts, but also realizing that access to those devices is key.
Right. And so the idea is they're going to be in this world anyway. They might as well have access to the technology that they're going to need. Is that where you're headed?
I'm not following.
Yeah,
your question.
that this is the life, this is the world that they're going to be a part of. It's going to have iPads and cell phones and different devices, and so are you saying that they need to have access to those?
I am saying that, but I'm saying that we know from research that that it's very important to have continuity between what kids learn in school and what they're doing at home. So that's it. So we need to make sure that those apps that are going to, and those iPhones or whatever, tablets that are going to help that happen, are available at home for those kids.
And Ms. Lucas, so the idea is that the iPads will go home. Is that where you were going to go?
That's our vision. I couldn't agree more with the comments around out-of-school learning. I did want to add to the point around engagement and attention to task.
Sure.
That when I spoke earlier about procedures around the devices, any technology, that is so crucial. So I couldn't agree with you more. If kids are trying to interact with the device while their teacher is teaching, that's not going to work.
Right.
So how do we support students and teachers in coming up with procedures and protocols where the kids know not to use the device during that time? It sounds impossible. It's not. So for example, when my teachers were instructing, there was a rule in our school, laptops at 45 degrees. So you're not on it. You might be daydreaming about something else, but you're not engaging with the laptop. So the procedures and protocols and how we structure school sites, I think as adults we often think of school as we went through school, and it's hard to look at it from another lens.
Does this feel harder though? I mean, so of all the things that you have to compete with to try to get, someone's attention in a room full of 35 kids or however many are in the class, if they have this nice, sparkly, shiny thing, that they just want to touch, isn't that harder for a teacher to get them to sort of pull away from that and eyes up,
It depends. In the beginning, when the devices were first rolled out at my school, and I'm noticing this in other schools, yes. That, to me, that's part of the cultural shift.
Okay.
Were we to put a puppy in the classroom, the kids would attend to that more, so you give them that time to explore, you empower them with tools to make good decisions, and you accept the fact that it will take time, and you monitor all those procedures, rules, and protocols. You also, we've been talking a lot about teacher education. We also have to talk about parent education.
Okay.
And how do we support our kids through their parents at home as well. I hope that we get in our discussion to digital citizenship, because that's linked to what we're talking about.
Well, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by digital citizenship?
I mean, in a general sort of way, I mean empowering kids and adults for that matter to make good decisions with the use of technology. So for example, I'm sure many people in the audience have observed what's been happening with LA Unified around the kids circumventing the operating system a few months ago, and how much media attention, I feel undue media attention that received. Okay. No comment. I'll stick to the line. I'm going to make a little editorial.
I'm sure we can talk about that later.
Yeah, but digital citizenship is ensuring that is a program, an instructional program, where we teach kids how to make good decisions online. Here's the thing: whether or not the kids have a district issue or school issue device, they have access to devices outside of school. So do we only care about their digital citizenship when they're in school? Or as adults, are we interested in empowering them with information to make good decisions, whether they're on their parent's smartphone or on a household computer? So that's what I mean by digital citizenship.
So what are you trying to teach them, though? I mean, so what's the heart of it?
So we're trying to teach them, how do you use technology responsibly? How do you protect yourself online? When you're on Facebook and you have a digital presence, they're not using Facebook in school. But when you're outside of school, do you want to leave a digital footprint that could keep you from getting a job later? That kind of thing.
Right, mostly for the high school kids.
Oh, elementary too. Yes.
They're supposed to be 12, but we'll move on.
For Facebook, yes, for Facebook.
Dr. Birch, so lots of technology companies have lots to gain from this move. There's billions and billions of dollars sort of hanging here in the balance, software, hardware. And not just this first go, but once we go down this path, we're going to have to replace devices. There's going to be new software. I mean, this is an enormous industry. Do you think that there's any corporate influence here?
Yes, I do. But there has always been corporate influence on schools. I mean, I think that we are at a critical moment where we're both at a period where there's economic sort of budget shortfalls in districts, and new gadgets that are and services that are being sold as cost efficient. I wouldn't say we're hanging in the balance, Evelyn. There's a lot of money that is being already passed around. So it's important to think about the fact that there's money from investors that's going into startups, right? And then startups are developing goods and services, and need ideas and those kinds of things. And then policy is coming in and saying, these things are needed in classrooms. They're part of what it means to be aligned to the Common Core. So the upshot of all of that is, I think, yes, there's corporate influence. I think that it's particularly important question to look at right now, because with digital education, instruction and curriculum and assessment is all tied together.
Yeah.
So if you, as a company, and you're smart and you see that marketing, you get into all of those three things, you have a lot of influence on what gets taught and how it gets taught.
Yeah. These are not small companies that we're talking about, though, that are being involved until now. I mean, Pearson is a global giant. Apple, that little company, Apple. So, to a certain degree, these are very large companies. And Pearson, as a curriculum company, has had influence on curriculum for a long time. But, do we want, the Apples and the IBMs of the world getting involved in, what our kids learn? And is that a risk?
Well, is that question directed to me first?
Yeah.
So yes, there are multinational and global. Pearson is a global company. I mean, it was in this space for a long time. But back in 2001, it was thinking about this. We can't stop, but we wouldn't want to stop the Apples from getting into the space. I mean, there's innovation there. Mm-hmm. I would argue that what we need more of as we move into digital education is more of the kind of accountability that we expect of our public schools and teachers.
So the contracts, right?
Well, contracts exist. You always have you usually have a contract when you purchase or lease something. But thinking about performance-based contracts,
right?
Are the services actually being delivered, and are of quality? And if they aren't, do you get paid?
It doesn't work that way right now.
We don't see a lot of that.
Right. So we pay up front, we get some curriculum, and if it doesn't work, maybe we move on to something else.
Right, but we don't have it. I mean, performance-based contracts for social services. I mean, we don't see it in a lot of sectors, and we don't see much of it at all in education.
Right. And when you buy a book, you see the book, but when you buy software, you see some sample lessons, right? I mean, you don't even hold the whole thing in your hands to.
Well, usually teachers in the district or schools, whoever's doing the procurement, will get the demo and do a lot of time thinking through but parents, back to parents, it's harder for parents to see what's going on because they can't walk into the classroom, right?
They can't walk into the iPad. It would be scary. Okay, so let's talk about LA Unified specifically. We've been sort of talking about this globally, but let's talk about what's going on in LA Unified. I might as well ask you about the problems because there's people in the audience that are going to ask you about the problems. So why didn't the district foresee things like kids in 5 minutes deleting the profile and getting on YouTube, on sort of the crushing load, on Wi-Fi, on the larger need for IT? I mean, there have been a few things that have come up, but none of them were really off the wall or esoteric. They were, to a certain degree, foreseeable. So what happened?
So with the operating system piece, we were under the impression that iOS 7 would take care of all of that. It didn't, and that was something we regret and learned from, and I think that's really important. To acknowledge that. I'm not going to sugarcoat that. Mm-hmm. The kids were told, but I know the next comment, what to do and what not to do. They're kids.
That's right.
So it's our responsibility to make sure that it's extremely difficult for them to do that. I will say this, and this may be controversial. I hope I don't get in trouble for it tomorrow at work. But children are extremely creative, and almost any interesting solution an adult can come up with, they'll find a way to think creatively around it. And that's not a malicious bad thing. So we come back to digital citizenship. Are we teaching our kids what good choices are around the device? So I think that's a really important point that I want to emphasize tonight. And whenever I talk about ed tech integration, in regards to, what was the second, forgive me?
The Wi-Fi.
The Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
So that piece, I think, has been kind of mythicized. ITD worked very hard to work with the school sites to upgrade the network.
They've told us directly, though. Teachers and students have told us directly that they can't log
You are
on,
absolutely right.
or sort of it's not working.
Right, and that was my next point, that even at my own school when we rolled out, when they upgraded the network, there's something that our ITD colleagues call tuning. So when you have that kind of influx of technology, the network has to be tuned and adjusted to it, no matter how robust it is. It wasn't used to it until the day it arrived. So what I hope and I think and what I'm hearing from the field is that when schools are having those challenges, there have been some exceptions, that ITD has been very responsive. At some schools, has it taken longer than others? Yes. Right. But and I'm sure you can imagine, I would say this is director of the project, I think with any large-scale rollout, it would be naive to think that there wouldn't be some challenges along the way.
Sure, but then why go so fast? I mean, you knew you were going to run into some of these things. It's obvious that you're going to run into some of these things. So why, the original plan was to have it in 650,000 kids' hands, next year. That was really ambitious, don't you think?
It was, and I think what, to the credit of those working on the project, we learned from phase 1 and slowed down considerably. So second semester, we were supposed to roll out to many more schools, and we asked to scale back to 38. Right. So there was an ambitious plan, but I think it's also extremely important to note that lots of lessons were learned from in phase 1 and applied to phase 2.
Okay.
It's okay to have ambitious plans if you're open to revising them based on data and feedback.
Okay. And why iPads? This has been discussed, in the boardroom, so this isn't new. What is it about the iPad? Why not the laptop?
So there was a vetting process or procurement process before I arrived with the project, and based on the specs and the requirements that were laid out, the decision by a team of people, it wasn't just one group of people, was to go with the iPad. Now,
but the RFP specifically called for a tablet. It did not call for a.
No, when you look at it, it said a touch screen, and then the dimensions kind of limited it to a tablet. So if a tablet is introduced, if a laptop is introduced that meets that need. So I can't speak to that because I wasn't part of that process. I think the issue is more around the tablet. Now we have an introduction of a resolution to look at the laptop, so we have to learn from that. I had laptops at my school.
You had both in your school,
yeah.
So what did you find?
I found that it depends on the task. Like there's I think a hyper focus on the device in the conversation in general. So you back map from what are you trying to accomplish with the kids to the device you choose. Some schools have gone with now it's iPods. Some schools have gone with laptops, some have gone with devices. You look at the needs of your students and your school population and your community, and you back map from that to the device you need.
So does that mean that you're open to adjusting the next RFP to have it be different kinds of devices? Is that where that's headed?
Well, I think the resolution is puts us in a position to do just that.
So the other part of this, and we've heard this a lot from the district, is that this is a civil right. There are kids who don't have access to this kind of technology that need that access to the technology, and part of that idea is that they would take the devices home, right, where they wouldn't have, otherwise have access to it. But that brings in a couple of different complications, and one of them is this idea of safety of kids taking them home. Yes. The other one is there are tech deserts in LA and a lot of other places where huge proportions of the population does not have access to high-speed internet. So it tends to make one think that maybe taking them home really isn't going to help those kids maybe as much as it could otherwise.
So I found something different in my experience. Okay. I think the safety issue is so crucial and so huge, so we have a safety plan to meet the needs of our students. So once again, ensuring that they know what to do in terms of taking the device home. You're not going to walk around the streets of LA with your device out. You make sure it's in your backpack. If you're at the park after school, you don't have your devices out, that type of thing. Ensuring that the street value of the device, if it's taken, is almost zero, maybe $5. So we have a pretty robust safety plan.
How can you ensure that the street value is $5?
Except for the parts, you shut it down to make it inoperable. So that if someone does take it, it's of no use to them. However, if they're found with it, they're prosecuted to the fullest extent of the laws if it still had its original value.
Did that happen at your school?
we didn't have that kind of loss. Once again, I credit my school community with making sure that our kids knew what to do. Now, granted, I had elementary kids. I want to be very transparent.
Yeah.
They weren't walking home from school like our middle school and high school
Being
students.
picked up by their parents.
Right.
Yeah.
They were being picked up, and we were magnet school, so a lot of our kids were bused. So our elementary kids may be in a slightly different situation while still obviously needing protection. This may be more of a middle school, high school issue with the walking back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
So the making sure that the kids know what to do with their devices. If someone does approach you for it, you don't have one conversation about it. You hand that thing over, and making sure that they know that it will be replaced. Don't worry about that. So when you look at the national statistics, I know LA is a unique urban environment.
Yeah.
They support our approach to this safety plan.
And so I guess, we're going to open this up to questions in a few minutes. I can feel you chomping at the bit. But let's see, there's a couple of, one really last issue to really get through here, which is the idea of money. This is a very, very expensive program. In LA Unified, it's $1 billion or so. And that's for about 3 to 5 years, right? The licenses run out, the devices will become sort of clunky and break, and you'll need new ones. And so how can we continue to afford this kind of investment?
So looking at alternative revenue streams, that's something our district is working on right now, and I can't speak to detail about it because we're still in the process.
Sure.
It's not a secret, it's just that we're still working on, how do we continue to fund this and what that might look like. I challenge everyone to think about the cost of a child not getting a high school diploma. Mm-hmm. I think that's a lot more expensive than investing in a device or two when the kids are school age.
But you're forced to make choices, right?
Yeah.
So we hear from teachers who say, we don't have copy paper, we don't have paper towels, forget the iPad, give me Kleenex.
Right.
These are day-to-day choices that's, you had to make as a principal yourself.
Sure.
And so is it that important, especially if they really are only spending an hour and a half a day on it, couldn't they share it? Do they actually each have to have their own? We've had computer labs in schools for a long time now.
Right. So I will never argue with a teacher about the needs at a school site. Needing all that is no less important than anything that we're trying to do through the project. I think it's important to look at funding streams. Bond money can't be used to buy some of the things that you just mentioned.
Yeah.
So how do we most effectively use the money that's available to us? Mm-hmm. Do teachers and school sites still need everything you listed? Yes. No one's going to get me to say that's less important than what we're doing. I'm sorry, it's been a long day. What was the second part?
Yeah, it was about basically, sort of how, where are we going to get the money, and all these choices that you're going to have to make.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's it. Yeah. This is bond funded for now. So
the devices, but not IT and not the teacher coaches and not a lot of the other sort of personnel that you're having to wrap around it to make it really work successfully, right?
Right now, the staff working on the project are bond funded, and because they're bond funded, they're limited in what they can do in honor of our taxpayers, what they were signing up for when they voted for the initiative. And so it comes down again to leadership teams at school sites and empowering them to facilitate the professional development as well.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
How else could this money be used, Dr. Birch? I mean, are there other technologies or plans or, smaller class sizes? What are some of the other options that schools could have that could also make a huge impact on learning?
Well, I don't, again, mean to dodge your question, but I think Bernadette is probably aware of all of the, I mean, there are some things that we agree on in the research that are important. So teachers matter. Teachers matter, and teacher quality and so forth. I mean, there are a number of we could spend the money on class size reduction, but local communities decide what they want to spend their money on.
Right.
Again, just back to the point is simply that if we're going to spend this amount of money, then we absolutely need and can't be sort of afraid to say, okay, we need some assurances that that the money that we're spending on and buying what we're buying and what we're releasing is actually of high quality, especially in the large districts. I mean, we have to be there with with those kinds
Vigilant
yes.
with how the money's being spent.
Vigilant is one way to think about it, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Questions from the audience, comments? We're going to have a few people coming around with microphones.
My name is Betsy Kahn. I'm the librarian in South Pasadena at the middle school.
Welcome.
I have a question about this bond, because I've read every single article that's come out about it, and that's the one piece I don't understand. What was that original bond money voted for? What was the length of time that bond was supposed to last? And I mean, the bit that I have gathered was that it was supposed to be for buildings or things that were supposed to last for 25 years, and I don't understand how the requirements were able to be shifted in such a huge way.
Do you feel comfortable? Yeah.
I wish that I was more expert in the bond. I do know, of course, you're right, the building and upgrade of facilities was, I think, the clear understanding of what the bond money would be used for. Technology was also listed as one of the things the bond money could be used for. The length of the bond, I'm not an expert in. I welcome you to email me and I'll get you that answer as soon as I can, but technology was part of the bond.
Yeah, so there were a number of, it wasn't one bond, there were a number of bonds that were voted on by the voters over several years, and they add up to about $19 billion, and the money was to be, they were called school modernization and construction. They had varying titles, but that was basically what the money was to be spent on. And as I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong, the argument is that, that these devices are sort of part of that upgrade of modernizing the schools. Yeah. Someone else? Megan?
Hi, my name is Susan. I'm an IT person at my school, and I've heard that the test on the Common Core has to be on a device with a keyboard. Now, an iPad does not have a keyboard, and you would have to add in a keyboard or use some other device. I mean, how are you approaching this to when the test comes up this spring?
So we have an RFP in process now for a wired keyboard to be attached to the iPad. Mm-hmm. And if you watch our board meeting on Tuesday, that's part of what's in front of the board.
It's an additional expense, yeah. Haley's over there.
Hi, my name is John. I'm a parent. I heard an interview on KPCC with a student, and this was after the rollout. And I agree the media attention wasn't exactly favorable, but he was looking at the content and doing a review of the content and was very unimpressed with the quality of the content. And that's really what it's going to come down to. If the content's not engaging, it's going to be a real problem. And his kind of feeling from the review was that it's kind of like a glorified textbook, not that interesting to him. It's not what he would expect from an iPad. And my immediate thought was, you guys talked about pilot programs. How was the decision made to go with, for example, Pearson products? What, were kids going to be engaged by this material? Because I think that's your biggest issue right now, is that if you roll out a bunch of glorified textbooks on an iPad, kids are going to be bored to death of them. So
I think that's a great point. Of course, I honor what that student said. I think that's one out of several thousand students, and we have to keep everything in perspective. We have kids where I go to schools and they love it, and kids who don't, just like a textbook. I don't personally find the content to be just a digital textbook or like a PDF of a textbook. It's highly engaging, actually, but the question comes down to engagement is different for each student. So what might be engaging for one student may not be engaging for that student. That's the same with a textbook. I think what's also crucial is how do teachers and educators use the app suite that's on the iPad too. The Pearson app or the digital content is not the only entry point that's available on the iPad.
Well, that was our story, actually, and what it was a high school student,
Yes.
and he found that there wasn't much there, and part of it is that it's just not done, right? Not all of the curriculum is up.
Right, the math for high school is not there because we didn't contract for that, and then ELA, they're drop-in lessons
English
across the board, K-12.
Dr. Birch, what have you found in terms of the quality of the programs and the software? I imagine it's kind of all over the map.
When when you ask what have I found, you're referring to Evelyn's referring to research that I've been doing nationally on 3 kinds of digital education: digital schools, digital curriculum, and digital tutoring. Well, the first thing we found, and this sounds so boring coming from a researcher, is of course that there's not a lot of evidence out there that looks at that very question of the quality of the curriculum, and we absolutely need to. I mean, that's right. That's a huge variable. So there's simply. I mean, there are scattered studies of the pilot programs around, but nothing of the size and shape around this rollout. So.
And this will be the largest one-to-one initiative in the country, right? LA Unified?
For the moment.
Yeah.
Probably.
I guess
yes.
New York is the only competition,
yeah, right.
and they're not rolling out this big.
Right.
Yeah.
So, right.
Yeah. Other questions, other comments?
Thank you. So many things I want to talk about. First of all, I'm very surprised that I haven't heard yet about the, I guess you could call it a pilot program, with what Salman Khan is doing with the Khan Academy, and specifically how he sort of flipped the format of kids learning. I would argue that actually freed the teacher to do the work that he or she is supposed to be doing, and that the technology assisted in that. Of course, there are a lot of obstacles with affluence and so forth, but also, I'm not sure if what LA Unified, the operating system, if it's a closed proprietary network of information, meaning that you don't have access to things like Facebook, ESPN.com, whatever. I mean, in any generic 21st century corporate office setting, if I work there, I'm not allowed to, I'm very limited in what I can surf. And that really kind of cuts out entertainment and makes the medium what it is, which is just a tool. For research. Also, third, I just had a question. Because it is just a medium and a tool, when I was young, lesson 1.1 was how to use my workbook. Here's your table of contents. Here's your index. Even in AP English, I was taught how to cite. Those are all lessons in how to use the tool in the medium of books. Which used to be, in 200 years ago, you weren't allowed to be near a book when you were a kid, So, I mean, we're just dealing with tools here. So in that vein, do you see a future in maybe making something like basic code mandatory to teach our kids, things like that, to where, we really ingrain in them early and often that it is just a tool for research, and we're going to show you how to look at it as such.
Well, that's a lot, yeah.
That's great. Appreciate the question. I'll just speak briefly and then look to my colleagues for other answers. You mentioned Khan Academy, and that does come up a lot. And again, there's terrific stuff happening out there. I'd be interested in what you mean by flipped the classroom, and sort of when there can be a media that kind of does that sort of changes, the dynamics, but that doesn't mean that you're sort of changing or shaping the role of the teacher in the school or the district. That's two very different sorts of things.
Well, there is the sort of flipped classroom model, right, where the kids sort of take the lectures at home and then they come in and do the work in the classroom. I think that's what you're talking about. That's absolutely right. And there's lots, and so there are also lots of models when it comes to blended learning. There's flex, rotational, and so forth. So. Anyway, good ideas, but lots of learning still to do on our side.
Categorization.
Yeah. And then what about the limits? Can they go watch ESPN.com and cat videos on YouTube?
Our district has a very robust filtering system.
Right.
Nothing is
when they're not deleting their profiles.
Correct.
Yeah.
That was a good one, Evelyn.
Sorry.
Yes. But yes, when the profile's still up, the filtering system is very robust. I want to make a very quick comment about the flipped classroom piece. Okay. It's crucial that everyone understand that this initiative is not about central. It's about local control. So principals and teachers make decisions around instruction. So schools make decisions around whether or not they want to do flip, blended, what have you. We're not dictating to schools, this is how you will, integrate the technology.
Except for the part that the curriculum's on there, right? So, I mean, they will have to there are certain things that you will be mandating that they do if the lessons are on the
Right, but that
devices.
would be true if it were a textbook.
Yeah.
It's our district
Yeah.
curriculum. Mhm.
Yeah.
But models, no.
In the middle. Thanks, Haley.
Good evening. My name's Susan, and the timing is great from the previous question. I am the product of a trade school in Philadelphia where I studied coding. This is going for 50 years ago, and I can't begin to tell you how many times my experience in high school has ported over to be beneficial for me. I don't really recall you having addressed the concept of getting children to do some coding while they have access to all
May I
these
speak to that?
Sure. Should
iPads
they?
and gizmos and gadgets. So if you could, I could tell you, I'm very enamored of the idea, and tell me if you have what your perspective on it might be, please.
Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, so should kids have to learn to code?
I won't say have to,
Right.
but I'm a big supporter of it. I'm sure many people in the audience are familiar with Hour of Code coming up. Okay, so our district is supporting that effort. So I strongly believe in coding. We did it at my elementary school, and it's not about the fact that every child is going to grow up to be a computer scientist. It's around the creative thinking and a critical thinking.
Can you
So,
code on
yes.
an iPad?
There are some things you can do on the iPad, yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
I'd like to add something.
not as robust, but some.
Yeah.
I think. I'm
Go
sorry,
ahead. No, go.
We're talking about coding and all these sophisticated things that we're doing, but I think it's also important to look at the fundamental parts of being a citizen and a digital citizen. And one of the things that I know is not taught in a lot of school districts is basic typing skills, or keyboarding, they call it now. And that type of skill is so important for students when they graduate, whether they're going to go into the workforce or go on to college. And I have a 17-year-old niece, and she was never taught. She's from a very good school district, and was never taught how to type or keyboard.
Right.
So I just wanted to add that I think we need to look back and just say, okay, what are sort of the skills that everyone is going to need?
Right. Not just shooting down the right color flowers when the right letter comes up, right? But learning how the QWERTY
How to
keyboard
put
works.
a sentence together
Yeah.
using the technology.
Thanks. Yeah. Other comments?
Good evening. Thank you all for being here and sharing your information. My name is Cassie Wright, Jr. I'm the Director of IT at Western University College of Dental Medicine. I wonder if you could speak on the technical support for your devices, whether it's an application or an app that's not working correctly, or if the device becomes broken, if the students are using it as a Frisbee. How is that affected? How is that dealt with? I think I heard Ms. Lucas say that if it gets broken, then it's replaced, no problem. I think I heard you say that, I'm not sure. And I also believe that the students are not yet taking the devices home, is that correct? That's correct. Okay, and so that will probably, I was wondering if you could speak on your experience as far as supporting these devices, and also how you believe, or how you plan to deal with the changes once the students do take them home, because I don't think the students are buying them themselves. They're distributed to the students, right? They're being paid for.
And so this
Thank
is
you.
another sort of lightning rod that's come up. The devices break. Who's responsible? They're very expensive, and some families do have a little bit of heartburn about being responsible for $800 device.
No, it's a fantastic question. The IT support, right now we have 47 schools. So our schools are assigned in a 2-to-1 up to 5-to-1 ratio with support certificated or a certificated educator, and then a classified tech specialist. The tech support is crucial. Is crucial. So ensuring that there are procedures and protocols around schools getting their needs met is so important. And so our staff who supports the schools around tech challenges, direct line to our help desk and our ITD to meet those needs. Our charge is, as the project goes to scale, ensuring that same level of service is available for all schools. It's much more manageable right now with 47 schools. What does it look like when all hundreds of our schools deploy? So, yes.
And the ultimate plan is 152 additional IT positions, right?
Yes, and 152 VLC.
which
Or
are
the
the teacher,
certificated, yes.
the sort of tech coaches for
Yes.
the teachers. So
That's
more
one
than
way.
300 people.
And then your question about, I'm sorry.
Are the vendors helping you out? And
Yes.
by vendor, I mean Apple.
Yes, they absolutely are, yes. We also have to build our own capacity. Additionally, we've talked about student leadership, teacher leadership, parent leadership, and obviously principal leadership. Student leadership in this is extremely important. I'm sure many of you have heard about things like Mouse Squad and Geek Squads at school sites. Not taking away instructional time from students, but again, giving them another skill set. They're kids who are intensely interested in this kind of thing. So we have students at school sites who are acting as kind of mouse squads and putting that formally in schools that want that. To your question about, broken or damaged devices once the devices start going home, a couple of things. That our parents are not financially responsible for a loss or theft if it's not willful, if the student did not willfully damage the device. And I think that's really important to note. Our thinking behind that is, and I'm speaking from my own experience as well as national statistics, when we teach the kids how to care for the device, frankly, they take better care of them than the adults on campus. I saw that at my own school. That's borne out in a lot of data. But once again, you can't expect that just to happen. You have to set up, protocols at school sites around and teach the kids how to do it and not just do it once. With my kids at school, we had multiple orientations. The kids had a handbook. How do you take care of the device? They felt a sense of personal ownership around the device. I don't want to minimize that. It sounds very warm and fuzzy, but when the kids know that that's their device and they're taught how to take care of it, they do.
Other comments, other questions?
Thank you.
My name is Novelyn Aquino. I'm actually a mom.
Is that Novelyn?
Yes.
Oh my God.
Which is kind of funny to have this conversation, or at least address this question, and not be in our school auditorium. One of the things that everything that Lucas has been speaking about, at Melrose, I am a parent there, and I've been able to see it. So everything that's been talked about, as far as even coding, my daughter, for a parent-teacher conference the other day, showed me how she made a little animal code and jump up and down in a room on a bed. It was insane, like all the kids got to do. Anyway, what I'm getting to is that I've been able to experience and benefit from what Melrose has done. And you were there for 6 years. My concern is that we talk about a pilot program or pilot schools that have been implementing and been doing these things and have teachers and have professional development being done in the school. And we see the kids thriving and we see test scores going up. My concern is, like, for instance, Melrose, they weren't in the first phase of the rollout, and my child now is in second grade, and if you look at it 5 years ago, the devices were new. Now they're sort of getting to where we need new technology in the schools,
yeah.
and they need to be replaced.
So what happens when the technology starts to wear out?
So what happens with that? And I look at it like, you have schools that are doing it. When is the focus going to become where we really take those schools to become pilot schools? I mean, a big thing that hit to me was you saying that we've noticed that, yes, we rolled out with iPads, but we're seeing that we need to roll out with not just iPads, but say laptops also, because that's something that we've been doing and already. How do you keep up with that? What is the plan for that, to keep up with that? And fundraising, because again, our PTO, we're doing all that we can to raise the funds for, say, paper towels or new software. But there are big things, big budgets that we can't raise money for, especially if most of our students are Title I. When is it that I look at it from my school, when can we be used as, say, a way to bridge other schools that are just getting started, where you're not leaving behind what we've created and what you started?
Thank you. There was a lot there.
Me, yes. Yeah. So Novelyn is a parent at the school I was principal at, so we have a lot of history together. So the project, the devices at Melrose were funded by parents and our school funds, and a grant and from the Magnet, well, not a grant, but money from the Magnet office.
Okay.
And a grant that we wrote for the iPad. So that is separate from the project. Everything Novelyn is saying, I agree with, and is being embedded in the project. One thing that's making me so thrilled about this conversation is that it's focused on instruction.
Yeah.
In the media at large, we spend a lot of time talking about deployment. We've been so focused on deployment that we haven't gotten to what Novelyn is talking about. But exactly what you're saying is what's in the works.
In
Exactly
other
what
words,
you're
taking the
saying.
lessons at that school and other schools and
That's
using
already
them in other
happened.
schools.
But she's also talking about using schools like Melrose, West Hollywood, Ivanhoe, Maywood, Stevenson as models for other schools. That is essential, and that is happening, Novelyn.
A few more comments. We're getting close.
Hi, good evening. My name is Eric Dreyer. I'm with the Pasadena Educational Foundation. We support a one-to-one laptop program at the new Computer Science Academy at Pasadena High School. I have a question for either of you. So there's been a lot of mention of devices, but there's all kinds of different devices. And we categorize devices as, some devices are inherently consumer devices, like tablets, for example, iPods. These are consumer devices. You can't write an iPad app on an iPad. Now there's producer devices such as laptops and desktops, and even very small, cheap computers such as the Raspberry Pi, Arduino, these different kind of maker environments. What do you see as the relative benefits between, say, producer devices versus consumer devices in the classroom?
Yeah, we've heard this has been part of the discussion, right? That the iPad is kind of this lean back device where you consume media versus a laptop or a desktop is something where you create. And so the question is, what do we need in our schools? Do we need these consumptive devices, or do we really need devices where kids can actually have a little more creativity and create their apps? Dr. Birch.
I think it's a great question in that you start to help us. Sure, we're talking a lot about devices, but there's important distinctions between their intent and their objective that matter. I'm just going to, before I turn to Bernadette, I think this gets me a little nervous though too, as although I'm excited, because so there's always a new kind of device or something coming down the chain, such as the nature of innovation. Great, but when you're in schools and your budget is limited, you can't always be buying the next best thing. So I just wanted to add that to sort of that caution to your comment.
So I also think it's a fantastic question. I would beg to differ. I saw lots of creative producer type activity on the iPads. The laptops definitely, have a certain kind of function. I don't want to limit the conversation to iPads are more about consuming and laptops are more about producing. It's just not what my experience has shown me. Again, I think it goes back, what are the instructional tasks that are crafted for the kids to work on? And I couldn't agree more with what you said around there's always going to be something new. It's how do we leverage what we have and not be so focused on the device but on the skill set.
I would simply add though too that so here's the case where I think you would agree that vendor influence and know-how and understanding of the classroom and what's the difference between consuming and producing knowledge is so key, right? So what you've described is wonderful, but that's a decision of the vendor, correct?
Last couple of questions. Haley, can you come to the front?
Hi, yes, I just wanted to mention a couple of things about the bond money. Yes, we have been told that it can be used for upgrading technology. One of the things it can't be used for is curriculum. And it's been very confusing as to why it is that the Pearson curriculum is embedded in the iPad and not separated out. Because actually it's not supposed to be, that's not bond fundable curriculum, and yet it is, we are paying for it because it's embedded in the computer. So that is a big issue. Also initially, the iPads were never going to go home. That was the initial presentation, and it happened afterwards. So that was another thing that made it rather fishy.
So you have concerns about whether the bond money is being spent and
Well,
the way it ought to be
correctly.
spent? Yeah.
Yes, it can be used for technology,
Right.
but there's a wiggle room there.
Right.
And the last thing is it also relates to the Common Core. It was something that is not talked about enough, which is an untested standards, totally. And now we have almost half of the states in the whole country that are either bailing out, slowing down, and New York is a disaster. So it is an untested thing, and the iPads, if you go to the meetings or listen to the meetings, it's all about getting those computers out for the testing. It's not being talked about as being a tool for learning.
Thanks. We'll leave the Common Core for, that's a whole other long discussion about the Common Core standards and sort of where they came from and what they can do. But they do require a certain amount of computer literacy, and they do require the test to be on computer. And you do call it the Common Core Technology Program. But she had a couple of very specific questions on the bond, and I'm not sure that you're in the right place to answer them, but one of them is that the curriculum cannot be paid for with bond money. Is that a fact?
Unfortunately, I can't speak to that. I'm not an expert in how bond funds can be used, but I do think it's an important question.
Okay.
And I'll bring it up to the BOC and ask them.
And what about the question of whether or not they can come home or not? Someone once explained to me that the bond money, if you take the school and turn it upside down and shake it, anything that falls out can't be, you can't use bond money on it. That may be outside of your expertise to talk about, but.
That was good. So again, I'm not an expert in the bond funding, but we do have legal opinion that they can go home.
That they can go home.
Just simply to add that this discussion of the bond and what's covered and what's not is another important issue. I mean, there's a lot of gray area here as we move into the tech space, and so we also, by stepping up, we need to step up with policy and begin to look seriously at some of these issues.
Yeah. Last question.
I have a quick question. Are you eliminating textbooks?
That's a great question. Immediately, no. I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with Williams and all that goes into that. The vision is that the textbooks would be on the iPads. That's the absolute vision.
The whole thing about it, I just wanted something that hasn't been looked at or been talked about is the operational side of it. Because if you really look at what kind of a fiasco handing textbooks are, it takes a couple days. If you can immediately give kids iPads maybe a day ahead of school starting, you're going to pick up 2 extra curriculum days a year times 660 or 650,000 kids. That's a lot of extra time. Additionally, you can also, from what I understand, I am not an educator, is that you can tailor intensive support or support education, or what am I trying to say? Like helping kids learn better. It's called intensive support or something. Intervention.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Those types of things, you can get much more focused on that and helping kids quicker, especially if you bring it down to the school level. And the amount of money that you'll save on just freight alone in books and investing in books and all those types of things offset the cost of those iPads dramatically. So I think just the curriculum and the learning, there's many other parts to this. I applaud you guys for taking this step. And I also want to mention one last thing is that Dr. Daisy did a wonderful thing that people did not at all acknowledge. When those kids went out and made, and hacked into the system, he didn't go down there or put out a press release and said how evil they were. He went down there and created a teaching moment to sit there and talk to them and ask them why, what the impact was, all that kind of stuff. And I think that's the mindset that you guys have, and I applaud you for it.
A big fan.
That's
Thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate you taking the time to come out and talk to us. We hope that this was informational and educational for all of you, and that you keep listening to KPCC and coming on our website. We'd like to thank our guests. Again, please give them a round of applause. And to you for coming out. Thanks again. Have a great night.